Hello, and welcome to my channel. Ich spreche in der Einleitung meiner deutschen Geschichte natürlich Deutsch, weil ich Deutscher bin. Aber der Rest des Videos wird in englischer Sprache sein für ein englischsprachiges Publikum, denn mir ist aufgefallen, dass es im Internet ein großes Interesse an diesem Thema gibt. Vor allem in den USA, in Kanada und Großbritannien, überall dort, wo sich Menschen die Frage stellen, was ist das eigentlich für ein Land im Herzen Europas, Deutschland? Was ist sein Ursprung, seine Geschichte, sein Selbstverständnis? Als Archäologe und Prähistoriker ist es mir ein Anliegen, einen umfassenden Überblick zu bieten, der zwangsläufig auch lückenhaft bleiben muss, in erzählerischer Form, aber auf der Basis historischer Fakten. Ich hoffe, dieses Video ist ein Anstoß für manche, sich mit dem Thema deutsche Geschichte stärker auseinanderzusetzen. Nicht nur mit den dunklen Kapiteln, sondern auch mit den lichten Momenten, den Gedanken, den Stimmen, den Spuren. Wenn euch dieses Projekt gefällt, freue ich mich über einen Kommentar und ein Abonnement. Und natürlich, wenn ihr das Video mit anderen teilt. Los geht's, let's begin.
Once upon a time, there was a land with many states, but only one soul. Princes ruled over forests, bishops over cities, dukes over river valleys. Each realm had its own coins, its own laws, its own flags. Some were mighty, some were barely more than a village. They raised their own armies. They spoke in different dialects. They even waged war against one another. And yet, they were connected. Not by a single ruler, not by a single law, but by a shared memory. A language that branched like a river. Songs that echoed across borders. Ideas that flowed like wind over hills. We call it Germany. Or shouldn't we better say the Germanies? Because it wasn't Germany then, not yet. It lived, not as a nation, but as a network, like a forest, not a fortress. A place that breathed through 1,000 little lungs, cities, courts, cloisters, marketplaces. A land that whispered in many voices, and yet sang somehow. In harmony. This is the story of that living thing. Not the birth of a nation, but the slow, stubborn growth of a culture. A land divided in power, but united in spirit. Fragmented, but never broken. We know it now as Germany. But its strength came not from unity. It came from life, rooted, growing, manifold. This is the story of the Germanies, of how they became, and sometimes forgot to be, one land with many states. In the beginning, there was a border, a line drawn by the Roman Empire across the rivers of Europe, the Rhine, the Danube. South of it, civilization, cities, aqueducts, Latin. North of it, forests, tribes, and a name whispered with unease, Germania. In the year 9 AD, that line was shattered. 3 Roman legions, some 20,000 men, were ambushed in the Teutoburg forest by a former ally, Arminius, a Germanic prince raised in Rome who turned against it. It was a catastrophe, and it changed history. From then on, Rome would never again try to fully conquer Germania. Instead, it learned to live beside it, and in time, to depend on it. Because the so-called barbarians were not just enemies. They were also soldiers, settlers, mercenaries, and eventually, rulers. In the 5th century, it was a Germanic leader, Odoacer, who deposed the last Western Roman Empire, a boy ironically named Romulus. But no one at the time thought the empire had ended. Rome as an idea continued, in laws, in the church, in the very language people spoke. And something else continued too. The Germanic peoples, now inside the empire, began to reshape it. The Franks, a powerful Germanic tribe, rose in the ruins. They embraced Christianity, adopted Latin, and kept Roman traditions alive in new ways. And then, in the year 800, their greatest king, Charlemagne, was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in Rome. It was not a return to the old Rome. It was a transformation, the idea of Rome reborn in a Christian, Germanic world. And that idea would not die. It would sleep, shift, and reawaken centuries later as the Holy Roman Empire.
Wait, did you just skip 4 centuries? I mean, we went from Rome straight to Charlemagne? Shouldn't we tell them what happened in between? This was no blank page. This was the age of migration, of upheaval, of new beginnings. After Rome withdrew, tribes crossed the old borders, not to destroy, but to settle. Visigoths in Spain, Ostrogoths in Italy, Vandals in North Africa, and Franks, yes, the Franks, in Gaul. They didn't just raid, they built kingdoms. In the Germanic West, one dynasty rose above the others. The Merovingians, long-haired warrior kings, half legend, half shadow. But real power slipped into other hands. Behind the throne stood a family of palace stewards, the Pippinids. They didn't rule yet, but they would. Their line would give us Charles Martel, the hammer against the Muslims at Tours. And finally, Charlemagne. So yes, the centuries after Rome were not dark. They were the roots beneath the Carolingian crown.
In the year 962, a new Roman emperor was crowned, not in Rome, but in Rome's shadow. Otto I, king of the Germans, took the crown from the Pope and with it the weight of 1,000 years. It marked the birth of what would be called the Holy Roman Empire, a strange name for a strange construct. Not holy like the Church, not Roman like the Caesars, and not an empire in the way we think of one today. Instead, it was a tapestry, woven from duchies, bishoprics, kingdoms, and cities, held together by faith, tradition, and ambition. Through the 11th and 12th centuries, emperors like Henry IV and Frederick Barbarossa tried to turn this fragile structure into real power. Barbarossa, the Red Beard, dreamed of a strong imperial rule. He led armies into Italy, built alliances, defied the papacy, and drowned crossing a river on crusade. He died in 1190, but his legend lived on. Some say he still sleeps in a mountain, waiting to return. It was during Barbarossa's time that one of the more unexpected dramas unfolded. Richard the Lionheart, King of England, crusader, hero of legends, was captured while returning from the Third Crusade. He was held in Germany by the Holy Roman Emperor himself until a massive ransom was paid. Even kings were not safe in this empire of shifting loyalties. And yet, despite all this complexity, the empire flourished. This was the time when cathedrals rose like mountains: Cologne, Strasbourg, Regensburg. The Gothic style reached toward heaven, while towns on earth grew in strength. Merchant guilds, free cities, universities, a new urban world began to stir. But with greatness came crisis. After the fall of the Hohenstaufen dynasty, the empire entered a time without a clear emperor, the interregnum, 1254 to 1273. And then the plague arrived. In 1347, the Black Death swept through Europe, killing a third of the population. Out of that darkness came something new. Cities grew bolder. A new class, the burghers, the townspeople, began to rise. The empire was changing, still fragmented, still proud, still Roman in name, but increasingly shaped by the rhythms of Central Europe.
Hold on a second. We just crossed the High Middle Ages, and no one's gonna mention America? Really? Because while cathedrals were reaching for heaven in Europe, ships were already sailing west. In 1492, Columbus stumbled upon a continent, and suddenly the world wasn't just Europe anymore. Yes, I know, it's not German history, but it changed Germany too. Trade exploded. Silver flooded in from the New World. Banking families, like the Fuggers in Augsburg, grew powerful. With trade came money. With money, towns expanded. Merchants gained influence. The city began to rival the castle. And let's not forget Spain. Before crossing the ocean, they had already crossed a whole peninsula. The Reconquista, the reclaiming of Spain from Muslim rule, set a pattern: conquest, faith, ambition. Ideas moved faster now, and money moved even faster. The medieval world was fading, and something very modern was knocking on the door.
After the plague came silence. Europe had lost a third of its people. Fields lay fallow. Villages vanished. And those who remained turned inward, searching for meaning, for hope, for forgiveness. It was an age of fear and faith. Flagellants marched through cities, whipping themselves to atone for the sins of the world. Mendicant friars, barefoot and poor, preached humility and repentance. And above them all stood the church, vast, powerful, and increasingly distant. For centuries, the papacy had grown rich. It sold indulgences, claimed political power, and lived in palaces, far from the lives of ordinary people. Criticism had been growing since the 13th century, whispered by monks, shouted by mystics. But in 1517, it thundered. Martin Luther, a German monk, professor, and man of conscience, nailed 95 theses to a church door in Wittenberg. He called for reform, not rebellion. But what followed was a fire no one could contain. The Reformation split the Christian world. Germany became the battleground, not just of theology, but of identity. Princes chose sides, cities declared loyalties, and the reformers themselves, Luther, Zwingli, later Calvin, could not agree among each other. Then came the Peasants' War. Thousands of farmers rose up, inspired by the message of freedom in Scripture, and crushed by the very reformers they admired. Luther, torn between social order and spiritual truth, condemned the revolt and watched the slaughter with grief. The division was permanent. What had begun as a movement of conscience became the Great Schism of the West, the Christian Catastrophe. And the flames never died down. Across the 16th and 17th centuries, Europe burned in waves of religious conflict. Until at last, in 1618, war returned to the German lands. And this time, it would last 30 years. The 30 Years' War was not just a German tragedy. It was a European apocalypse. Entire regions were depopulated. Towns disappeared. Some never rebuilt. 1 in every 3 Germans may have died. And when the killing finally ended in 1648, with the Peace of Westphalia, a new Europe was born. One that accepted religious division as permanent. One where sovereignty, not faith, defined borders. Germany was still fragmented, but now also confessional. The soul of Europe had been torn and stitched back together, scarred and changed. The Peace of Westphalia ended the bloodshed, but it did not heal the soul. Europe, and especially the German lands, had seen what happens when conviction turns to fire, when truth becomes a weapon. And so a new idea rose from the ashes: order. In politics, this meant absolutism, kings who claimed divine right, who ruled without question, who brought stability through strength. In thought, it meant the birth of modern science, laws of motion, reason, systems. The world, it was now said, could be measured, predicted, controlled. The 18th century brought both crowns and compasses. And in the German world, two great powers emerged from the patchwork of principalities: the Habsburg monarchy, vast, Catholic, imperial, and the Kingdom of Prussia, efficient, Protestant, rising fast. Austria ruled over many peoples: Czechs, Hungarians, Slovenes, Italians, and Germans. Its strength lay in tradition, diplomacy, and marriage. Bella gerant ali, tu felix Austria nube. Let others wage war, you, Austria, marry. Prussia, by contrast, built its power with iron and discipline. Under Frederick William I and Frederick the Great, it became a state built around its army, a society of soldiers and savants. These two powers, so different, yet both German, began to shape the future. Austria looked south and east. Prussia looked north and west. And between them stood the Empire, still intact but fading. The Holy Roman Emperor was now more symbol than sovereign, a figure of dignity, not direction. Meanwhile, the lesser princes, bishops, and free cities jostled for their own place in the sun. And yet, through all this, the German lands continued to shine in other ways. This was the age of Goethe and Schiller, of Kant and Leibniz, of Bach and Mozart, of scholars and poets, inventors and idealists. Culture blossomed, not because Germany was unified, but because it wasn't. Competition between dozens of states meant competition in ideas, in science, in art. Universities vied for the best minds. Courts hired composers to outshine their rivals. Princes became patrons, and cities became centers of learning. In a strange way, fragmentation became a fertile soil, and from it grew the brilliance of the German spirit.
Wait, you just said Goethe, Kant, Mozart, like everyone would nod along. But honestly, outside of Germany, people might know Beethoven and Mozart. But Goethe, Schiller, Heine? Not so much. Let me fill that in. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Germany wasn't a country, but it was a powerhouse in the arts, in philosophy, in music. Thinkers like Kant shaped modern ethics. Hegel inspired revolutions. Schopenhauer challenged belief. Nietzsche shook the foundations of morality. Poets and writers: Goethe with Faust, Schiller with William Tell, Heine with biting wit and tragic longing. These voices gave Germany its other title, Das Land der Dichter und Denker, the land of poets and thinkers. Romanticism? It flourished here. Music, too. Bach laid the foundation. Mozart, though Austrian, stood in that tradition. Beethoven revolutionized it. Schumann, Brahms, Wagner, they carried it forward. So when we talk about culture blossoming in fragmented Germany, we mean it. This wasn't just art, it was identity, a Germany of the mind before it ever became a state.
In 1789, the world changed. The French Revolution toppled the monarchy, declared liberty and equality, and unleashed a storm across Europe. Just 13 years earlier, the American colonies had broken free from British rule, a republic born of Enlightenment ideals. But what began in France was different. It wasn't just a revolution, it was a reckoning. 1,000 years of divine order, of kings and emperors, church and crown, suddenly questioned, overturned, burned. And then came Napoleon. Soldier, statesman, emperor. He marched across Europe not as a monarch, but as a man who made monarchs kneel. He redrew maps, shattered borders, and in 1806 forced the last Holy Roman Emperor to abdicate. The empire dissolved, not by consent of its princes, not by legal assembly, but by pressure, by conquest. And yet, in the minds of many, it never truly vanished. There are stories of West German farmers long after 1806 who traveled to Vienna to seek the Kaiser's judgment, unaware or unwilling to accept that there was no Kaiser anymore. That is how deep the empire ran, not as a government, but as an identity. What came next was uncertain. The German Confederation, a loose collection of states, tried to fill the vacuum. In 1848, revolutionaries gathered in Frankfurt to forge a liberal, unified Germany. They had ideals, they had talent, but they lacked power, and the princes did not step aside. The dream of unity passed to someone else, Otto von Bismarck. A Prussian aristocrat, a realist, a master of manipulation. Through war, diplomacy, and sheer force of will, Bismarck unified Germany in 1871, not through revolution, but through conquest. The German Empire was born in Versailles, not in Berlin. It was a victory, but also a warning. Germany had become a nation, but not through the people, not through freedom, through the sword. And when Bismarck was dismissed in 1890, the delicate balance he maintained unraveled. Germany, now strong, sought its place in the world, and with it, hegemony. But strength without restraint is dangerous, and the storm that followed would shake the world. When Germany became a nation in 1871, it came late and came strong. But Europe had already found its balance. The older powers, France, Britain, Austria, Russia, had settled their borders and their pride. Germany's arrival upset that balance, and with it came turmoil. 2 world wars followed. The second ended in 1945 with devastation unlike anything Europe had seen. Germany lay in ruins, its cities bombed, its people displaced, its name associated with terror and genocide. The nation was divided. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany. In the East, the German Democratic Republic. The West German state, the Bundesrepublik, embarked on a new path. A democracy not just by design, but by conviction. It chose peace over power. And while it rebuilt its economy with breathtaking speed, the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, it remained cautious in politics. Germany became an economic giant, but a political dwarf, by choice. It traded in machines, not in missiles. It exported cars, not ideologies. And slowly, it became something unexpected, a friend of its neighbors, a symbol of peace, a nation that had learned from history and offered that lesson to others. In the East, a different story unfolded. The German Democratic Republic was neither democratic nor truly sovereign. It was a satellite of the Soviet Union, bound by ideology, policed by fear. Its independence existed mostly on paper. Behind the Berlin Wall, life continued, gray, restricted, controlled. And yet, even there, something stirred. The human spirit is hard to silence. In 1989, the Soviet Empire began to crumble, and with it, the East German regime collapsed. The wall came down. Germany was one again. At last, a German revolution with a good ending. But it was not a return. It was a new beginning. This was not the Empire, not the Reich, not the Cold War frontier. This was a form of Germany the world had never seen. Not an empire, not a battleground, but something entirely new. How do we see Germany today? As Europe's strongest economy. As a leader in science, in industry, in diplomacy. But also as a nation that still hesitates. Should Germany lead or hold back? Should it become a political power to match its economic weight? Or is its strength precisely in restraint? What is the role of this new Germany? A Germany that has never existed before. Not an empire, not a Reich, but a republic, cautious, thoughtful, and still searching for its place. Where does the journey go from here? That is for the next generation to decide.
Wait, you're just going to glide past 2 world wars and the greatest crimes in human history? Really? I mean, yes, we're keeping it short, but come on. World War I? Started by Austria, but escalated by Germany. A Europe tangled in alliances and pride, and Germany pushing too far. Then came the Treaty of Versailles. Harsh, punitive. Many Germans called it a humiliation. That bitterness didn't vanish. It grew. And when the global economy collapsed, it exploded. Into that chaos stepped Adolf Hitler. He promised strength, restoration, revenge. But what he brought was ruin. The Holocaust, 6 million Jews murdered, along with Roma, disabled people, political dissidents, and others. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the method, systematic, calculated, industrialized murder. This wasn't war, this was annihilation. We should never speak of German history without pausing here, to name it, to feel the weight of it. So no, we can't just skip that.
We began with a map, not of one Germany, but of many. Duchies, bishoprics, kingdoms, free cities, a mosaic of cultures and histories. And through the centuries, that mosaic changed. It broke, it reformed, it darkened, it shone. There were empires, there was ruin, there was rebirth. And today, Germany stands united, but still diverse. Its strength lies not in sameness, but in difference. In the sounds of dialects, in the pride of regions, in a federal system that gives voice to the local, not just the central. But change is everywhere. Villages shrink, dialects fade, landscapes are leveled by modern life. And so we ask, must new times always mean new ways? Or can we sometimes look back, not to return, but to remember what was good, to hold on to the things worth keeping? Germany's story is not one of perfection. It is one of becoming. And perhaps that is its true legacy. Not unity, not power, but a quiet strength, born from many voices, many paths, many wounds. A nation that was never just won and never broken.
So, that was quite the ending. A quiet strength. A nation born of many wounds. Beautiful words, truly. But don't you think you laid it on a little thick? I mean, is Germany really that special? Sure, it has some unique features. A deep federal system, a serious culture of remembrance, a language that shapes thought, a love for order and for rules. But then again, every nation is unique. France has its revolutions, Britain its empire, Italy its chaos and its beauty. America, well, we know that story. Germany is special, but not more special. It is what every nation is, a tapestry of light and dark, of glory and guilt, of dreams and disappointments. And maybe that's the real point. You don't have to choose between pride and shame. You can hold both. So yes, Germans should be proud of Bach and Gutenberg, of Weimar and reunification, of thought, of music, of resilience. But never forget the dark chapters. Both belong to your identity. And that's okay. That's human.
Eine übersteigerte Heimatliebe, ein chauvinistischer Nationalismus hat uns Deutsche und die Welt ins Verderben gestürzt. Das ist unser Trauma. Ab den 1970er Jahren haben wir es aufgearbeitet, aber typisch deutsch. Gründlich, systematisch, intellektuell. Aber emotional blieb vieles unbearbeitet. Und so blieb die Wunde offen. Heute haben wir kein wirklich gesundes Verhältnis zu unserer Heimat. Schon allein der Begriff Heimat kommt uns verdächtig vor. Denn wir haben gelernt, wer sein Land zu sehr liebt, der riskiert es, in den Abgrund zu führen. Also halten wir Distanz. Wir begegnen unserem Land, unserem Staat, unserer Nation wie einer früheren Jugendliebe, die uns schwer enttäuscht hat. Mit innerer Zurückhaltung, mit kühler Sachlichkeit, bloß keine Gefühle. Doch so kann die Wunde nicht heilen. Ohne heilende Rückbindung verlieren wir unsere Identität. Wer sich nicht mit sich selbst versöhnt, der verliert irgendwann das Gespür dafür, wo er hingehört und wofür er stehen will. Was wir brauchen, ist eine erwachsene Liebe zu unserem Land. Keine naive Verklärung, aber auch keine ewige Abgrenzung. Eine Liebe, die Verantwortung kennt, die auch das Dunkle nicht ausgrenzt und die trotzdem bejaht, was uns geprägt hat. Denn Identität heißt nicht, sich selbst zu feiern. Es heißt, sich zu verorten, in der Geschichte, in der Gegenwart, in der Welt. Wenn ich von mir sprechen darf, ich liebe meine Heimat und ich liebe auch ihre Geschichte. Nicht alles davon, aber ich verschließe mich auch nicht. Auch das Dunkle gehört zu mir. Und gerade deshalb will ich dieses Land mitgestalten, weil ich es kenne und weil ich es liebe. Deutschland ist über 1000 Jahre alt. 12 Jahre davon waren so finster, dass sie alles andere zu überschatten scheinen. Aber sie sind nicht alles. Unsere Geschichte bietet mehr, viel mehr. Ideen, aus denen wir lernen können. Erfahrungen, die uns Orientierung geben. Werte, die es zu bewahren gilt. Vielleicht ist jetzt die Zeit, in der wir aufhören sollten, nur mit dem Kopf zu verarbeiten und anfangen sollten, mit dem Herzen zu verstehen. Denn das wäre erwachsen. Wenn du das auch so siehst oder ganz anders, dann schreib's mir bitte in die Kommentare. Lass uns darüber reden. Und wenn dir mein Video gefallen hat, dann freue ich mich über ein Like, über ein Abo und darüber, dass du es teilst. Nur wenn wir gemeinsam hinschauen, können wir auch gemeinsam weiterkommen. Ich bedanke mich nochmal für eure Geduld und wir sehen uns beim nächsten Mal, wie ich hoffe, euer Peter Buwen.